Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching the Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So today's top 10 is a Patreon voted list. I always give a certain tier for my Patreons the opportunity to vote. On the next top 10 list I do. I give them a selection of about 5 or 6 ideas that I've got. They can suggest their own and then they vote, and then whichever one gets the most votes is the next one that I do. And generally I do 1 or 2 from the sequence and then redo the list again. So this time we've got the top 10 drafting card games as recommended, or drafting board games I guess. But there's a couple of little caveats with this one because there are 2 types of drafting that you get. You get closed drafting and open drafting. Closed drafting is the bit that I like, which is where you have a set number of cards or set number of tiles or whatever it is you're drafting, and you choose one from there, you pass it to the next player, you'll receive some from the player next to you, and it's just that selection of cards and tiles that goes round. So you don't add more to the mix. It doesn't chop and change. You always have the original, say, 21 cards that were in the mix, and then you draft until they're all gone. That's the sort of drafting that I enjoy. Open drafting is effectively where you've got cards on the table, and in turn you and other players will take one from whatever is available. Now, that's not to say I don't like that mechanic, but that mechanic kind of features in every game. I mean, honestly, millions of games have open drafting, which means that if I was to include open drafting in the mix, I would literally just have the entire world of board games to choose from. And, you know, sometimes the open drafting is such a small element of the game that it doesn't really matter. So I decided to exclude open drafting from this list, which then caused another problem. There's not a lot of closed drafting games, period, let alone 10 really good ones that I can shout out from the mountaintops. So I've got 10 on this list, but, well, you'll see from my 10 and 9 that I am somewhat going to unexpected territory for this one. But that being said, there are some closed drafting games that I do really enjoy, and therefore I want to talk about those. Now, I am also going to specify that by closed drafting as a mechanic, it's got to be a fundamental part of the game, or at least a significant part, in that you can't, just blaze through it. You've got to take note of what's going on, and also it can't just be a setup thing. So it can't just be like, for example, I mean, let's say in Ark Nova you decided to draft the cards that you started the game with. Well, that's a setup thing. Seasons, better example of Seasons, you draft the cards that you have for the game at the very start, but then for the whole rest of the game you never draft. So that doesn't count either. I'm not including little setup tweaks in this. This is where the fundamental part of the game, or an important part of the game, is the draft. So with that being said, hopefully this won't get too much, blowback if you don't agree with the list, but let's get on with it. Blame the patrons if you want.
Help! Help! I'm being repressed!
My number 10 is a game that honestly has been replaced by other games, but this one does have closed drafting in it, and certainly if you include the proper setup for the game, it's actually one that I've warmed up to over time. I didn't like it at first, I thought it was average after a bit, and now I'm like, okay, if you have this setup, I enjoy the game, and that is you must have the base game, the Prelude expansion, and then if you must, either Venus or Colonies, not both. Yes, I'm talking about Terraforming Mars.
I don't think any of us expected him to say that.
And also capped at 3 players. It's very specific. Terraforming Mars I have now warmed up to and enjoy as a game, but I've played it with more than 3 players and I just think it takes way too long. It should be a 90-minute game tops and it just drags out like crazy. Although last HandyCon I had to play a 3-player game that took nearly 2 to 3 hours. In fact, I think it took about 3 hours, a 3-player game, because we were using every expansion, including the Turmoil expansion, which is utter garbage. So yeah, honestly, if you want to get me into Terraforming Mars, just give me 3 players, have just Prelude and the base game. You don't need more than that. And then it's a speedy affair with some cool closed drafting of the cards in every single round where you get new stuff to choose from, and then you decide whether you even want to play it that round. You might just hang on to it for a bit or just hate draft somebody else. And that sort of aspect is probably the most fun part of the game, is the acquisition of those cards and playing them. The stuff with the map, whatever. I mean, the map barely means anything. It's like, okay, have I got a city? Have I got a tree? Are they next to each other? That's for the most part what they are for the maps, and who cares what variant map you use. But that's kind of a side thing for me. I'm having more fun doing cool stuff with the cards and enjoying the drafting phase, which is what I get out of Terraforming Mars. Hence it's number 10 on this list. Yes, I have scraped the barrel a little bit for this one, but that being said, if you play Terraforming Mars with the normal rules, where you just draw from the deck, the game is a complete luck fest. So you have to do the drafting and suck up that extra time if you want the game to be, well, fun. It needs to be that way. So it's not exactly a die-hard favourite of mine, and games like Ark Nova and a few other games have just completely killed it stone dead, but I gotta say, for number 10 on this list, it is a decent drafting game. My number 9 is a game that I used to own a long time ago, but haven't owned it for a while now, and the main reason is because a game that we'll talk about later kind of eclipsed it. And yeah, I mean, spoiler alert, you kind of know that one's coming. But this one was a slightly more meaty version of this other game. It came from Artipia, and it was probably one of my first games I got for drafting. It's a solid game, but has quite a few fiddly aspects, and maybe it's just not the easiest one to teach to new players, and that was Among the Stars. It had really nice artwork, and it was space station themed, and the idea was that it bared resemblance to another popular drafting game, except this one had a spatial element. So it wasn't just simply about getting cards that match symbols and iconography, it was also trying to build the space station in front of you and actually have, like them in certain places to score more points. Like, okay, I need to have these reactors next to here, so when I draft this, when I get my next drafted hand of cards, it's like, well, I've got a reactor, but where am I going to put it? I can't connect it to that because it will be bad. I'll take that first, stick that there, and then hopefully the reactor will come back around and I can put it there later. It's stuff like that. And you had aliens with special powers and a couple of expansions to add more cards in. It got a little bit too bloated for its own good, and as I say, it is definitely a bit of a fiddly game because there's a few more rules that you need to deal with. There's more AP potential here, but the game was still fun and it looked really good on the table. It just needed a decent amount of table space. So it's not one that I own anymore, but the drafting part of it was still really good fun. And if I'm more in the market for things that are a bit more streamlined these days. I mean, they can be complex games, but have them be streamlined and smooth so that they're elegant games. This one felt a little bit too clunky in places, and so it probably wouldn't it wouldn't make a resurgence to my shelf these days, but still, I gotta give props. It is an enjoyable game nonetheless. My number 8 is a drafting game that most people probably wouldn't have heard of. It isn't exactly sold anywhere at the moment. I think it's out of print, and it sort of just came and went. Like, it really disappeared. But my friends really enjoy it, and it's their copy that I play, and I tend to play it a few times when I go around theirs. And that is a game called Neon. Now, art-wise, it's a bit... and graphic design wise, it's a bit in your face. Like, seriously, how on earth can I tell what the hell's going on some of these tiles? It could use a little bit of work in that department, but it's still a fun drafting game where you're building up a city, and I do like city building games, and you've got that spatial awareness thing again, like I mentioned with Among the Stars, where you've got to get the roads to link up. And so if you build your map in such a way that you close off all the roads, and it's going to hinder you later on, but you're trying to get resources in order to manufacture higher tier goods. You're trying to get scoring opportunities from like the different types of buildings, so residential, commercial, the office style buildings, that kind of thing. And it got a few cool things in it. Now the thing that it really does hurt, besides the graphic design thing, is the disaster tiles. They are a mechanic that really needs to be out of that game. Sometimes I have games where they're just too much and like too much of a power swing thing, and then I have games where nobody cares about them. But it's one mechanic that I think they could delete out of that game, and it didn't need to be there in the first place. Again, streamline. But that aside, the drafting part is still fun, and I like building up my board with the map of tiles and having to get that horrible angsty decision of, hang on a minute, if I take that tile, it scores well, but then where am I going to put it? If I put it there, then all my roads have to now go round it. That's annoying. And that aspect of drafting where you're looking at a hand of, well, in this case, a hand of tiles, and sort of deciding, I could but I don't, you know, when you start getting that kind of brain-burning decision, you know that the game is doing something right. It just needed a bit more development time and a few tweaks to sort of make it, you know, sing true. I mean, I reckon if it came out today with, you know, a proper, you know, a more modern take on graphic design to make it smoother and more easier to, you know, more elegant, then I reckon it could have done quite well. But as it stands, it's still a decent drafting game, but not much higher than 8. Okay, this is the last one I don't own, I promise, alright? Although, it was only recently that I think I sold this one, maybe sometime last year, and it's a game that I actually really do like. So the other 3 you might have thought, well, they've got problems and such. This one I actually thought was a really solid game, particularly when the expansion fixed one of the rules about how the endgame was triggered. But the problem is that it was a very difficult game to teach, and this is Inish. And Inish was an area control game where you were controlling these very cool looking tiles that fit together to create a map. And the way it was that when you controlled certain amount of things or when you fulfilled certain objectives, you triggered an end game. And then everybody else, it was a bit like declaring check in chess. Everybody else had to try and stop you by the time it got around to your turn, otherwise you won the game. The problem is this dragged the game on, so the expansion fixed it where it doesn't do that. The problem is that you kind of need to know what you're doing in this game, and if you get a noob in there, it's gonna hurt. And so it was very difficult for me to get this game to the table, and after a while I had to just decide, look, I'm not getting it played, it needs to sell. But the card aspect with the drafting is really cool. You've got these cool tarot cards with a unique style of artwork on them. They do really powerful things, and there's only so many of them, so you know which ones are available and what other players could have. But the drafting was tweaked slightly, because normally you take something from a hand of cards and then you pass it on and you set it aside. So you've kept that. That is yours. But in Inish, it was weird. When you got a hand of 4 cards, you basically picked up, all right, I'll take this card and put it down there. And then you got passed another set of cards, but you didn't have to set aside the one you did before. If you decided, okay, I'll take these 2 cards from this new hand and return the other one, you could do that. You just basically had to have 1, 2, 3, 4 cards as you went through the 4 different phases. But you could chop and change and exchange the cards that you were doing, as long as you ended up with the right number of cards. So it added a cool twist on the mechanic that we hadn't seen before, and I don't think I've ever seen since. I don't think any other game I've seen does this. But it's a cool idea that you go for one hand and think, that looks cool. You get the next hand and you go, well, these 2 are really cool. You know what? You can go back, I'll take these 2. And then you get your next one and it's like, well, I'm going to keep the one I've got here and take those ones, you know. Oh, actually, maybe I'll return this one and take those 2. And it's just, that's a cool thing. It just made for a very interesting, you know, mechanic. But as I say, you need to know what you're doing with the cards, you need to understand how the area control works, and so if I was playing this for 3 new players, I'm going to cream them like crazy. It was just like a foregone conclusion. And not enough people had played the game, people looked at the artwork and thought, ugh, I don't particularly like it. I think the artwork's fine, it looks gorgeous on the tiles and the mat stuff, but yeah, the artwork on the tarot cards was a subjective decision. I liked it fine, but I can see why you wouldn't. You know, it's in the eye of the beholder. But yeah, had to get rid of it, so not on the shelf anymore, but I'd still play it if someone put it in front of me.
Ah, nobody wants to play with me.
Right, I own these games now, okay? Right, we're finally getting the games that are on my shelf. Although this one, I swear I'm like the only person that likes it. Or the only person that sort of, you know, really got into it. Now granted, the rulebook is messy. The rulebook could be a lot better, and I wish that they would release a new version or somebody just come up with a decent rule summary, because that does hold it back a bit. But I actually really got into an unusual game from Osprey called Brian Boru, the High King of Ireland. You know, I know nothing about the history of this guy or Irish like military history or anything like that, so you know, that wasn't what attracted to me. The thing that attracted me to this though was the trick taking and drafting aspect of this. So it's essentially like an area control game in some respects, but how you win the areas is done by trick taking. So you have these cool like tower sized cards, and you, in fact, let me try and get a few of them out. You know, I can sort of show you that. Whoop, there we go. So these tarot cards were what you were drafting and playing for the tricks, and depending on whether you won the trick or lost the trick, you got different effects from the cards. But you only have so many of them in a round, and you have to draft them before you start the trick taking. And that may sound like a very small aspect of the game, but it's very important because you're hoping to win and potentially lose certain tricks, because if you win, you get the top effect. If you don't, you get the bottom, one of the bottom effects. But you might want the bottom effect more than you want the top. And you know it's a high card, so the bottom effect is likely to not be great, but the top effect will be brilliant, and vice versa with lower numbers. But you're looking at these cards of the different colours that do different actions and that, and thinking, well, hang on a minute. As we're drafting around, I noticed that these have gone round. You're likely to be doing monasteries quite a bit, so you're going to be hanging on to those blues. Have I got a chance of beating you? In fact, maybe I need to lose to you. In which case, maybe I should take a nice low card like this. But if it's too low, the bonus isn't particularly good. I don't know. And you have to consider more than your usual typical drafting game would for these cards, you know, because what you draft has a profound effect on your ability to do well in the trick-taking phase. So yeah, the trick-taking phase is the majority of the game, I will grant you, if you want to consider this a void pick, but you know, the fact that the drafting is not just simply draft and get it out of the way, it's actually got a significant importance, is why I figured that this one would qualify for the list, at least at number 6. Give me a break. But this one, yeah, I seem to be one of the very few people that got into this. I think this is a solid game. It just has a bit of a fiddly rulebook. You know, the rulebook could have been a lot better for a game that's not that complicated. But, you know, as trick takers go, this is one of those examples of innovation. Using trick taking to do something cool and different, and no other game I've got is anywhere close to feeling like this. So I had to give Osprey credit for this, and you know, say the board looks really cool, and the artwork's fine as well. It's a little basic looking, but it's not the most expensive game either. I wonder if this is even still in print, because this one really did come and go. But it's one I'll hang on to. Bramborough, Hiking von Island. My number 5 is, again, the aspect of the drafting is a part of the game, but it's not necessarily the full-on show part. But I like the way the card system works in this. And again, I was struggling to find 10 games that I thought were like brilliant drafting games, especially ones that weren't like the exact same as each other. So give me a break. But this one is a recent game. I think I reviewed it January last year, actually. And this is a 2-player only game. It came out of the previous Essen, and the publisher actually fed us beer while we were like, as a sort of special promotion for the game, and I thought it was great. I mean, honestly, you want me to try your game, feed me alcohol, that's going to help. But, you know, not necessarily give you a good rating, but it'll certainly get me to come by your stall. But Beer and Bread has an interesting multi-use card system in it, where the two of you are essentially rival brewers, and you're using these multi-use cards to get the resources, make beers and the like, and upgrade your farm in such a way. But the drafting part is slightly cool, because there are 2 seasons. In the first season, you grab a hand of cards, these multi-use cards, and you're drafting them back and forth with your opponent. When it gets to the sort of darker autumn phases, you take the hand of cards. You don't draft them then, but you can exchange them with a sort of face-up display there. So I suppose you could argue that that's more open drafting, but the closed drafting is still a big part of the game, particularly as those phases, I think, I don't know, I can't remember if it's even or you get more of the summer phases, but still, in those phases, you've got 5 cards each, and you're drafting them back and forth. And in a 2-player game, there's more of that aspect of drafting, which I like, which is the idea that you look at a hand of cards and go, well, I want that, but I also want this. I don't think you'll take it though, so I think I'll get this one back, but I know you'll nick this one, so I'll take this one first, pass it to you, and after I'm done with the next one, I receive that hand back, and I'm like, did you take it, did you take it, did you take it? Oh, I'm good. You know, that's fine. And that aspect is something I like with a lot of drafting games, where I actually prefer to have less players than more, or fewer players than more, whatever. I know somebody's going to get me on the grammar thing with that one, but you know, this one is, again, it's not the forefront of the game, but it's still a decent, you know, important aspect of it. And the fact that these are multi-use cards means that, you know, you're drafting the cards for various reasons, you know, not just simply like one effect. It could be multiple. It could be like, you know, I really need this card, not for this, but it will fit nicely down here. And I love multi-use cards. You know, if you're going to make me draft cards that all just have one use apiece, fine. But if you make me draft cards that will have multiple uses, then it's almost like you've doubled, if not tripled, the amount of sort of effects that you have in your hand to pick from. And that, you know, that's something that always gets me excited in a drafting game. But as I say, I struggled to make the list, but this one I think is still qualifying. You know, the drafting part is still a, you know, I mean, it's not like all drafting games have just drafting. You know, there is some poetic license we'll have to take here, but I don't know. We'll see what your thoughts are in the comments. But beer and bread for number 5. Right, well, with these next 4, the vast majority of the game, if not all of it, is drafting. So no more getting on my back for that one. And certainly some of my earlier ones had a decent amount of drafting, didn't they? But this one is a very tiny game, a tiny little filler, which you, as viewers, actually suggested to me. I'd only barely heard of the game, and I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a try. I like little fillers, but you were all saying, go play this one, go play this one. You'll like it, Luke. You'll like it, Luke.
Do it, do it, do it, do it.
I bought it for £6 off Amazon. It was like a multilingual version, but it's language independent, so what does it matter? And you were correct. Ohanami is a really cool game. Now, it has a rubber band around it because the box is sadly not particularly sturdy to keep everything in place, so it's a means to an end. And annoyingly, I couldn't fit this in one of my little cases that I was doing, little photo card cases, so it's still got to be in the box. But Ohanami is still a really solid little game, and it's a very simple one at that. All you essentially have is a bunch of these cards with lots of numbers on them coming in different types. You play through 3 rounds of the game, and it's a straightforward drafting session. So you have a certain amount of cards that you get at the start of a round, and you'll pick one, pass them on, and draft. So it is fully closed drafting. But what you're doing is you're essentially creating up to 3 columns with the numbers that have to go in numerical order, up or down. And so you take a card that's 57, I take a 52. Well, okay, I can put that below the 57. But then I can't play 56, 55, 54, 53 in that column. I'd have to use a different column. And so because these cards range from like 1 to 120 or somewhere around that notion, you know, there's a lot of extremes for these cards, but they score differently as well. And this is really clever. You've got like blue cards that score less but in every round, green that score middle but only in 2 rounds, and grey that score a lot but only in the last round. It's, you know, there's some cool aspects like that, but with the drafting bit, because I tend to play this as a 2-3 player game, you're definitely looking at your opponent to sort of go, well, hang on a minute. These numbers aren't fantastic. I can probably live with this one, but oh yeah, if I give you the 119 and the 115, yeah, you're gonna hate me for that one. You know what? Yeah, I'm gonna take that card. I'm gonna give you these 2.
I am evil Homer.
And there's a lot of that. You've got to pay attention to what the opponents have got number-wise to know if the cards you pass them are likely to get taken or not. In this game, it's paramount. You may think, oh, I really want that other cherry blossom tree because it'll increase my points. Yeah, but if it cuts off most of your numbers, you're taking a big hit on that. And if it also means that your opponent takes the other green and you're left with a couple of bogus numbers, then, well, you know, you might have shot yourself in the foot even more. But it's very simple rules, and yes, you do have to house rule the rule about if you draft first, you get to play in turn order. It's some daft little rule. Whatever it is in the book, basically just ignore it and just play it simultaneous turns. Check out my top 10 house rules list for more information. But Ohanami was suggested by you as the viewers, and, you know, great. I do take notice of when you suggest games to me. And, oh, stupid rubber band. Hate rubber bands! My number 3 is a classic gateway game in drafting, so you cannot get on my case about this one not involving enough drafting. This game is fully about drafting, okay? And as a gateway game, it's the staple, although I need to buy myself the little version of this. You know, my parents have it, and it's like, oh yeah, the little version is portable, easier to get to the table, and, you know, one that's worth having. I instead have essentially Sushi Go Party, the big version. Now, honestly, you could get the normal Sushi Go or you can get this one. Doesn't matter, both are well, I mean, it's the same game, but this one essentially gives you more variation. So when you have the normal Sushi Go, you just have the pre-built set. But it's in a nice small box and it's dirt cheap, like less than a tenner. Here you got to pay a bit more, you got to have a tin box, and then you've got to obviously have like the decks bagged up, but you do get to create your own menu, so you get to decide which card you're going to have in the game.
Is bread free? Yeah. We'll split an order.
And yeah, it does involve having a few baggies of the different cards. Like, you know, I fancy having pudding this game, and I'll have appetizer dumplings, and I'll have some eels, and, you know, what else can we have? Well, we could have some onigiri as well as some maki rolls. And, you know, the customization of Sushi Go Party is cool, but it does mean a longer setup, a longer game, and of course, it's more for people who know what they're doing with Sushi Go. But still, I really enjoy this game. I mean, as a gateway game, it's just a classic. very easy rules, particularly if you use the small box pre-built set. I mean, the cards you get in there are so simple. Most of it is just score points for sets or having 3 of something or 2 of something. They're very easy, and it's the best one to teach the drafting mechanic. You know, here's your 7, 8, 9 cards, take one, pass it on, alternate left or right, and at the end of each round, score based on what you've got, reset, go again. I mean, it's so simple, but I really enjoy this one. It's, you know, it's a solid game, you know, really does the job, and, you know, as a gateway games goes, it's one of my favorites to bring out and teach people because of just how smooth and elegant it is. Pick your poison. Grab the big set if you can find a copy of it. I think it's usually quite hard to get it in print every now and again. It sort of comes and goes. But if you do see it and you want the variation for 2 to 8 players, then by all means grab this. But even if you just get the tiny one, you're still in with a really solid game. My number 2 is a mixed bag in the sense that it's a mixed mechanic game. So it has drafting, but it also has role selection. But the two kind of go hand in hand because you are picking the roles for each round. But it's still a game that I have loved since the days of, what, like 2000, I think the original came out. I played this when I was at university, when I was like just into Magic the Gathering roleplay and the occasional Steve Jackson game. I barely knew board games at that age, you know, like 23 odd years back. And, you know, this one has still remained one of my favorite games, particularly in its new version, and that is the ever classic Citadels. Because in Citadels, you have the big selection of cards, although now you have even more of these cards. And the idea is, each round, you have different roles that will come out for you to use, but you draft them. So in, like, you know, one round, here we go, we got Navigator, Marshal, Abbot, Thief, King, you know, or whatever. You know, you grab a bunch of these and then you're thinking, whoa, which character do I fancy? You know what, I could use the Diplomat this round. I'll go last, but then I get to exchange a district. Great. King, well, I've got yellow districts, I could take the gold, that's cool. But then you've also got the Assassin and the Thief, for example, in the basic set, where it's like, well, the Thief's going to try and nick my money. Which one do you think I'm going to pick? And the Assassin is going to kill someone. And it's like, who do you think the Assassin's going to kill? You think they're going to kill the Merchant? And if they kill the Merchant, that'd be cool. So should I take the Merchant and risk it? Or should I take something else and hope I don't get killed? These decisions are really cool, but it's different roles each round. So you might have, say, you know, one face up, another face down, then you look at the rest, pick one, pass it on, pick one, pass it on until everybody's got a role. But the roles available will be different each time. It's the same 8 that you use, but, you know, which ones are out of the entire round, and also turn order will matter, you know, as to whether you even get much of a choice. You know, that will matter, because it's all right saying, well, person who goes first gets to pick from, like, you know, 5 or 6 different roles, but then if I'm going last in the round, I literally get to pick between the Diplomat and the King. Oh, great. And did the person before me pick the Assassin and knows I'm going to get a 50-50 chance? I have no idea. But I really enjoy this game. I like using the different cards, you know, in fact it seems I need to sleeve a few more of these actually. I must have run out of sleeves, but that's an easy fix. But this is still a really cool game. I particularly like this version with the tarot size cards and the upgraded components, and that, you know, this is really cool. Plus it adds, you know, the additional sets of cards. But if you're able to just get the original with the original artwork in the tiny box for like 12-15 quid or whatever it is, it's still a really solid game, and at least that'll be a nice cheap portable version of it that will easily sit on your shelf in a small cubby hole. But yeah, I still really enjoy Citadels. After all this time, it's remained an evergreen for me, and my number 2. Gee, I wonder what my number 1 could possibly be. I mean, nobody could possibly guess this one, could they? Yeah, I mean, you knew this was coming as soon as it, so I better not belay the point. 7 Wonders.
This man is overgasped!
Is there really any contest? I'm sorry, I mean, when you're talking about the number 1 closed drafting game, there is nothing better than 7 Wonders. It's a great light game that you can make more complex with the expansions, although I will stress that the best way I think to play this game is cities and leaders combined, and that's it. Armada is fine, but I wouldn't want to combine it with leaders and cities. It's just like too much to deal with. And the latest expansion, I forget what it was called. I remember reviewing it, but it adds like the project cards and I think one other tweak. You know, that's an easy one to fit in if you want. But even just base set 7 Wonders, I'll happily play it and have a good time. But oh man, I mean, even this edition of the box is getting a little bit worn because it comes out, you know, quite often, and there's like, you know, a few too many reference aids and rulebooks in here that, you know, much must be said. But look at this, you know, I've got the folded space insert for this. I have got metal coins, every expansion. You name it, I have got it for 7 Wonders. I just love this game. And, you know, what more do you need to know about it? You know what 7 Wonders is. It's just build your civilization with one of multiple different civilization boards. You get your level 1, 2, 3 cards, you go through 3 separate eras effectively, and it's just a simple closed drafting phase, except you've got the different types of cards, material, the resources, the military, the science, the what do they call, the culture cards, and the trade ones. And so you can change up your strategy in each game based on what cards you get, but also what civilization you have. Throw in the expansions, and then you've got the black cards that essentially are like kind of like the shady underworld style of, you know, of the civilization, so they give you cool effects. But definitely, if you're going to get just one expansion for this, you need to get leaders. Now, there's more leaders here than there's in the leaders expansion, because this is combining every expansion and anniversary thing to date. But yeah, leaders is just like the key expansion you need. Having these leaders that you draft, again, more drafting at the start of the game to give you more strategies or more cool effects that you may choose to bring out during the game, or you may not. It's just a wonderful addition to the game. Now, yes, it does involve you having to look at these various reference aids on a regular basis, because the iconography is decent, but not exactly the most intuitive at times. But certainly in this 2nd edition version, it was improved. But it's just, by this point, the amount of people who have played this and who have tried it, it's so smooth. I mean, this is one of those games that I can play with expansions. You know, you get those games where you're like, oh, I love it with the expansions, but I never get to play it with the expansions because nobody's ever played the game before. Well, this is one of those games that people have played. A lot of people have played and can easily adapt to adding leaders or cities in. Yeah, they may be a little slowish at first, but they'll be able to understand if they've played the base set already. Yes, I wouldn't throw in the expansions with brand new players. That would be a mistake. But yeah, I just really get a kick out of this game. And, you know, that's just the board game version. You can play this on Board Game Arena nice and quick. But man, the app, the phone app that you can get for your mobile or tablet, whoo-wee, that's a really good app. You can just bang out you can bang out like high player count 7 Wonders games in no time at all against the AIs. And it's still a good, fun, challenging experience. So, well, yeah, what more is there to say? Did you honestly think there was going to be another number 1 on this list? I'd be curious to know what number 1s would feature on your lists, if not 7 Wonders. Like, say you're one of the people that hates 7 Wonders. I'd be curious to know which drafting game actually took over on that front. But, you know, we'll get onto that in a minute. So there you are, my top 10 closed drafting games, and yeah, like I say, I had to scrape the barrel a little bit, but honestly, you go on Board Game Geek and search just for closed drafting games. You'd be surprised how few well-known ones there are, and also how many really good ones there are. You know, they may feature drafting in a very small element, but I was trying to come up with 10 games that featured it as a prominent part of the game and not just a bit of setup, you know. And if you exclude that, if you have that criteria, the list becomes very tricky to make. And I only really had a couple of shortlist items. One was Zuli, which was like a little card game recently that kind of is a bit like if you cross Sushi Go with Art Nova. It's kind of weird. It's you know, you're building up a zoo, you're drafting cards, you're trying to get sets, but it's about building a zoo with enclosures and stuff. I like the game. I gave it a favorable rating. I do think that certain cards in it are woefully imbalanced, but it's still a good little fun game. But I think Sushi Go is still the better game. And the other one was Bunny Kingdom. Bunny Kingdom involves drafting all these different like bunny cards to score points and putting the bunnies out on this map to score by area control. The game itself is fine, and the drafting bit is easily the best part of the game. The problem is that the board and the bunnies are such a nightmare to visualize that it's like, my eyes trying to pinpoint where everything is. It's like you need to have like opera glasses with telescopic lenses to try and see where things are on the board. They tried to fix this with a bigger board, but it still didn't do enough. It's still too painful for the eyes. And on top of that, the scoring in Bunny Kingdom, oh my god, it took forever. It just grinds the game to a halt, and then suddenly you've got to score this little aspect, and then you can get going again. Not a bad game, but again, streamlined, elegant. Bunny Kingdom is a fun game. It is not streamlined and elegant in any way. No way. It's way, way too clunky to be in that category. And that's kind of it. I mean, I considered other games. There were things like Point Salad and Cascadia and Seven Wonders Duel, but again, they're open drafting games. And yeah, if I was to say top 10 drafting and just have the open drafting in there, then there would be more choices to pick from. But again, open drafting is just such a common mechanic. I mean, it's a means to an end. It barely even feels like its own mechanic in a sense. So I was just a bit like, do I really want to include those in there? And so I presented myself with a little challenge and thought, let's just go with closed drafting games. And I have heard of other ones like Fairy Tale and a couple of others that were like, out of print by now, but they exist and they're fine. I haven't played them enough. I might not have played them at all, and they probably just wouldn't make my top 10, but I'll be interested to know your thoughts. So, that any drafting games, specifically closed drafting games, that didn't make this list that you think should have, I'd be interested to know your thoughts, particularly what your number one is, because if your number one isn't one of the ones on my list, then what else is there? I'd be curious to know. So this one should be interesting to get some feedback from, people watching. And yeah, I think if you're watching this video, you might want to have a look in the comments and see what other picks people have mentioned. So that's it from me on this episode of the Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and let me know your comments as I stated. Don't forget to check out the other content on the show that I've done since January, including my live Q&A and my Ark Nova Marines World review and the recent review I did for Raising Robots, a kind of engine builder with some similarities to Wingspan. Check that one out for more details. So until next time, remember, regardless if you're a hate drafter or not, it's still only a game. So take care and bye for now.